In our headlines on this Monday, April 13th, here in South Korea, the U.S. is set to start a naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, stopping ships from entering or exiting Iranian ports, as well as intercepting vessels that have paid transit tolls to Iran. And Iran, for its part, vows not to surrender to U.S. threats and finds fault with the American delegation for the failure to seal a peace deal in Pakistan this past weekend. Meanwhile, President Jae-myung hosts Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk at the Blue House today for talks to bolster strategic partnership in defense and high-tech industries. U.S. President Donald Trump ordered the U.S. Navy to block the Strait of Hormuz, and the U.S. Central Command says its forces will restrict all vessels entering and exiting Iranian ports starting Monday morning U.S. time. Our foreign affairs correspondent Oh Soo-young has the latest.
U.S. forces will begin blockading maritime traffic in and out of Iranian ports from Monday, after negotiations between Washington and Tehran broke down in Islamabad. In a post on X on Sunday, the U.S. Central Command announced the measure, saying the blockade will be enforced impartially against vessels of all nations entering or departing Iranian ports and coastal areas, including all Iranian ports on the Arabian Gulf and Gulf of Oman. CENTCOM, however, clarified its forces would not impede freedom of navigation for vessels transiting the Strait of Hormuz to and from non-Iranian ports. The maritime measure follows the failed 21-hour talks in Pakistan between U.S. and Iranian delegations. U.S. President Donald Trump said Iran refused to give up on its nuclear weapons ambition and declared the U.S. would soon begin the blockade. He added he had instructed the Navy to intercept vessels paying passage fees to Iran, and that the U.S. would begin destroying mines laid by Iran along the strait. Experts say the failure of the first round was perhaps expected, but should not lead to escalation.
Neither side may have wanted to give the impression that they came to an agreement too quickly. They could be opening themselves up for criticism at home that they may have given in too much or too easily. So in and of itself, that is not necessarily the problem. But if on substance they remain this far away from each other and there is escalation simultaneously, that certainly doesn't bode well.
Trump told Fox News Sunday Morning Futures that Iran hasn't left the bargaining table, and he predicts Tehran will come back to give the U.S. everything it wants. He later told reporters at Joint Base Andrews that he doesn't care and is fine if Iran doesn't return to negotiations. The Wall Street Journal reported the same day that Trump and his advisors are considering limited military strikes in Iran, in addition to the U.S. blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, as a way to break a stalemate in peace talks. Although the White House declined to discuss specific options, officials told the Journal that hours after the Islamabad talks collapsed, the president considered resuming a full-fledged bombing campaign, though less likely, or a more temporary blockade. He also reportedly remains open to a diplomatic solution. In the meantime, Oman has called for an extension to the 2-week ceasefire set last Tuesday to allow more time for the US and Iran to continue dialogue. Oh Soo-young, Arirang News.
Iran, meanwhile, has vowed not to surrender to U.S. threats and laid the blame on the American delegation for the failure to seal a peace deal in Pakistan this past weekend. Our Jong-un has more.
Iranian Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi said Washington and Tehran were just inches away from reaching a deal during the peace talks. Writing on social media following the collapse of negotiations in Islamabad, Araghchi said Iran engaged with the U.S. in good faith to end the war during intensive talks at the highest level in 47 years. He added that Tehran had been met with maximalism and shifting goalposts, and that a sudden shift in the U.S. position ultimately derailed the negotiations and prevented a memorandum of understanding between the two sides. Iran's parliamentary speaker and chief negotiator Bagher Ghalibaf told state media that the U.S. delegation at Saturday's marathon talks in Islamabad ultimately failed to gain the trust of the Iranian delegation in this round of negotiations, adding that Iran would not bow to any threats. Ghalibaf also said Iran had put forward constructive proposals that moved discussions forward despite deep mistrust between the two sides and dismissed threats from U.S. President Donald Trump. Earlier, Trump ordered a U.S. naval blockade of the Strait of Hormuz in response to what he described as Iran's unyielding refusal to give up its nuclear ambitions. Iran's Revolutionary Guard warned that military vessels approaching the Strait of Hormuz would be considered a violation of ceasefire, while the country's deputy parliament speaker said the strait is completely under Iran's control. The Iranian parliament also emphasized that the strategic route is non-negotiable under any circumstances. Jong-un, Arirang News.
South Korea, for its part, is maintaining its emergency economic response system in light of the prolonged unrest in the Middle East. Now, this is according to Blue House spokesperson Chun Eun-soo this past Sunday, after a related meeting presided over by Presidential Chief of Staff for Policy Kim Yong-bom. Officials acknowledged the uncertainty hovering over the local economy and agreed it would take significant time for energy supplies to return to normal from the Middle East to Asia and beyond. President Jae-myung and his Polish counterpart Donald Tusk sat down for talks at the Blue House on this Monday, during which they agreed to advance their ties to those of a comprehensive strategic partnership. Our Blue House correspondent Song Yu-jin covers their remarks and more.
Wearing a tie in the colors of Poland's national flag, President Lee Jae-myung welcomed Polish Prime Minister Donald Tusk to the Blue House on Monday for their first summit. Yi and Tusk agreed to upgrade South Korea and Poland's strategic partnership to a comprehensive strategic partnership. As expected, defense ties were at the center of the talks.
양국의 고해적 방산 협력은 더욱 확대될 것입니다. 저는 양국 간의 방산 협력이 심화 발전할 수 있도록 이미 체결한 총괄 계약의 안정적 이행이 필요하다고 말씀드렸습니다.
Defense cooperation remains the key driving force of our bilateral relations. We will continue with this cooperation while also accelerating technology transfer, localization, and the relocation of production facilities to Poland.
The remarks refer to a defense framework agreement worth more than $44 billion signed in 2022, South Korea's largest overseas arms deal to date. Since then, Korean defense firms have signed follow-up contracts to supply equipment such as K-2 tanks and K-9 self-propelled howitzers. Beyond defense, the two sides are set to expand cooperation in energy, infrastructure, and high-tech industries. President Lee particularly called for Poland's support in helping Korean battery firms enter the country's energy storage system market. Prime Minister Tusk, noting that South Korea is Asia's largest investor in Poland, said he would continue efforts to ensure a favorable business environment. Also discussed was coping with the fallout from the war in the Middle East.
또한 양국 모두 중동 전쟁이 불러온 위기에 대처하기 위해 글로벌 공급망의 안정화가 중요하다는 점에 공감하였고 이를 위해 필요한 협력을 이어나가기로 뜻을 모았습니다.
We must work together toward a new geopolitical balance and peace, and I believe Poland and the Republic of Korea should join forces in this effort.
The summit wrapped up with an official lunch featuring a blend of Korean and Polish cuisine.
The Polish Prime Minister's visit comes less than 2 weeks after President Lee hosted the leaders of France and Indonesia at the Blue House. The visit marks another in a series of recent summits as global uncertainties persist. Song Yu-jin, Arirang News.
Across the border, North Korea's Kim Jong-un has highlighted the task of promoting ties with China as his regime's top priority. Remarks to this end were made during talks with Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi. According to the regime state media, the talks took place on Friday, the final day of Wang Yi's two-day visit to Pyongyang. North Korea is also set to support China's policy for a multipolar world, keeping in mind the importance of advancing ties to safeguard common interests. The Chinese diplomat, for his part, claimed Beijing-Pyongyang ties have entered a new phase of development following last year's summit between Kim and Chinese leader Xi Jinping. Hungary's centre-rightist party has emerged victorious in an election that ends Prime Minister Viktor Orbán's 16 years in office in a setback for his allies at the White House and over at the Kremlin. Our Peon Jin covers the election results and their broader implications.
Hungary's Prime Minister Viktor Orbán, the country's conservative icon, has lost power after 16 years in office, after the opposition Tisza party won Hungary's general election. Orbán conceded defeat less than 3 hours after polls closed on Sunday, calling the result painful, in a race marked by intense campaigning and unusually high voter engagement.
Dear friends, the election result is not final yet, but it is understandable and clear. The election result is painful for us, but clear. The responsibility and possibility of governing was not given to us. I've congratulated the winner. I thank you for all the great work.
His defeat handed Tisza's Péter Magyar, a former Orbán ally who broke away from the ruling Fidesz party in 2024.
In the history of democratic Hungary, never before have so many people voted, and never before has a single party been given such a strong mandate as Tisza.
Turnout reached a record 77.8%, significantly higher than in previous elections, signaling strong public demand for change. The outcome was a stunning blow for Orbán, a close ally of both U.S. President Donald Trump and Russian President Vladimir Putin. U.S. Vice President J.D. Vance had made a visit to Hungary just days before the election to back Orbán's re-election bid. This marks the end of Orbán's long-standing push to shape Hungary into what he called a neoliberal democracy, a model that often put Budapest at odds with its Western allies. Over the years, his government has clashed repeatedly with the European Union over rule of law issues, while maintaining closer ties with Moscow. European leaders are watching closely for a potential reset in relations with Brussels, while the shift could also influence support for Ukraine, an issue where Orbán had frequently broken ranks with EU partners. With Magyar now set to take power, attention turns to how quickly his government will move to realign Hungary's foreign policy and restore ties with key allies in Europe and the United States. 배은지, 아리랑 뉴스.
The South Korean parliament is concluding its 3-day interpellation today, with the final session focused on social matters, including education. Our political correspondent Moon Hae-ryun reports.
The National Assembly convened on Monday afternoon for the final day of its 3-day interpellation session, with lawmakers turning their focus to education, society and cultural affairs. Prime Minister Kim Min-seok joined key cabinet members, including the Ministers of Justice, Interior and Education, for a wide-ranging round of questioning that touched on several sensitive issues. Political tensions ran high as lawmakers clashed over a series of controversies ahead of the June 3rd local elections. At the heart of the controversy were allegations of prosecutorial misconduct and the previous decision not to indict a mayoral candidate in Busan over alleged illicit payments. Lawmakers pressed ministers on concerns about fairness and potential political bias in investigations, to which they pledged to tighten standards.
Going forward, we'll make sure this doesn't happen again by handling things more fairly and thoroughly, especially in election-related cases, under stricter standards.
But the session wasn't solely consumed by political disputes. Lawmakers also turned their attention to issues closer to home for many South Koreans, such as education policy. Education Minister Choi Kyu-jin said a restricted phone for students designed for learning use could be a meaningful way to address excessive smartphone use among younger children, but several factors such as broad social consensus would be needed before moving forward. He also highlighted plans to promote reading from an early age.
We plan to designate pilot institutions focused on reading, strengthen teachers' capabilities in reading education, and expand programs linked with libraries to help foster a reading culture from early childhood.
With both sides using the session to sharpen their positions, the day's proceedings carried added weight, not only as a check on government policy, but as a signal of where the political battle lines will be drawn ahead. Moon Hae-ryun, Arirang News.
And in other news now, BTS's 5th album Arirang remains at the top of the Billboard 200 for a 3rd week in a row. This is the first time for any K-pop act to spend 3 weeks at #1 on this chart. The previous best was 2 non-consecutive weeks achieved by the soundtrack to K-pop Demon Hunters. The Billboard 200 ranks albums based on overall consumption, including physical sales and streaming. With this milestone, BTS also becomes the first group in 13 years to spend 3 weeks
at number 1. And BTS's Arirang World Tour has sparked much speculation about the potential economic gains of the group's performances, given its remarkable global fan base. That being said, my colleague Park Jun-an recently had the pleasure of spending some time with 2 BTS fans here to take a look.
To create unforgettable moments, global BTS fans ARMY visited South Korea to enjoy the opening week of the group's world tour Arirang in Goyang. And when fans visit, they don't just come to Korea for the concert, but also to experience the culture.
Beyond the music and merch, what we are seeing here is real economic activity. As fans travel, shop, and dine, their spending spreads across the local economy, driving consumption in Korea.
From BTS-themed city tours to activities like merch shopping and local dining, these fans transformed their concert trip into a cultural and spending experience.
Once you come here for BTS, you are part of this economical impact because you fly, you buy stuff here, you buy accommodation, so everything you do that is related to them increase economy of Korea.
Hallyu wave is a big impact for us because as we fans, we really consume and we really buy what our idols are using or endorsing. K-pop in general really attracts tourists to go here in South Korea.
Over the last 10 years, there has been a meaningful increase in the number of foreign visitors to South Korea. From just over 13 million people in 2015, the number in 2025 rose to almost 19 million, up over 43%.
Travel patterns these days are no longer centered on simple sightseeing, but rather on experiencing local culture firsthand and living like a local. For people who are big fans, there are likely to be fewer constraints on spending.
The largest ever by a K-pop act, BTS is visiting 34 cities for a total of 85 shows as part of the group's world tour, which is projected to generate at least $1 billion in direct revenue for the group's agency HYBE and have a multi-billion-dollar impact on the global economy. This is a powerful reminder of the strength of BTSnomics. Park Jun-an, Arirang News.
Also here on the local front, a new monorail is seeking to offer greater public access to a former presidential vacation home in Chungnam province. Our Cha Yun-kyung has a glimpse.
The monorail climbs slowly along the mountainside. As it reaches the top, the panoramic view of Daecheongo Lake and Cheongnamdae unfolds. The newly opened 330-meter monorail connects the boarding station near the main gate to Observatory Number 1. It consists of 2 linked 20-seater cars, accommodating up to 40 passengers per trip. The most significant change is the enhanced accessibility for the mobility impaired, including the disabled, the elderly, and children, which was previously a challenge due to Cheongnamdae's sloping terrain. While Observatory Number 1 is one of the most scenic spots within Cheongnamdae, limited access had long been a source of inconvenience for visitors. However, the monorail project became possible after the Ministry of Environment revised the regulations to allow limited development within water source protection areas. The Cheongnamdae Management Office now plans to begin official operations. With improved mobility added to its beautiful scenery, all eyes are on whether Cheongnamdae will solidify its position as the representative tourist landmark of Chungcheongbuk-do province. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
This is The World Now, bringing you everything you need to know from around the globe. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Sunday made an appearance in southern Lebanon, standing among Israeli troops inside what his military calls a security zone on Lebanese soil. Speaking on video surrounded by soldiers in balaclavas, Netanyahu said the war is not over and his forces have more to accomplish and are actively doing it. The Trump administration has pressed Netanyahu to scale back its attacks and open negotiations, warning the strikes are threatening the fragile U.S. Iran ceasefire. Despite that pressure, Israeli strikes continued on Sunday, killing at least 35 more people, according to Lebanese authorities. Nigerian military jets on Saturday night struck a market in the country's northeast, killing more than 200 people. The strike hit Jili Market in Yobe State near the border with Borno, a region long at the center of a Boko Haram insurgency that has killed thousands and displaced millions. The Nigerian Air Force said it had been targeting Boko Haram militants in the area and has since activated a formal investigation into the civilian casualties. A local councillor told reporters that over 200 people lost their lives and many others are injured. In Haiti, at least 30 people have died in a stampede at the La Ferrière Citadel. The stampede on Saturday during an annual celebration at the 19th century UNESCO World Heritage Fortress was made worse by heavy rains. Haiti's Civil Protection Authority warned the death toll could rise, noting that students and young people were among the large crowd gathered for the event when the disaster struck. The crew of NASA's Artemis II capsule was reunited with their families in Houston, Texas on Saturday after splashdown off the coast of Southern California the day before. The 4 astronauts had spent nearly 10 days in space following the first manned trip to the vicinity of the moon in over half a century. The capsule sped through Earth's atmosphere at 32 times the speed of sound before parachuting into calm seas at 5:07 p.m. Pacific time in what was described as a bullseye landing. The mission also broke the human spaceflight distance record set by Apollo 13 in 1970, traveling 406,000 kilometers from Earth. Chu Ji-hyun, Arirang News.
Unseasonably warm conditions will continue into tomorrow, with temperatures running more than a month ahead of schedule. Despite it being April, daytime highs will rise to around 25 degrees Celsius in both Chuncheon and Seoul. But temperatures will drop sharply in the evening, falling by around 15 to 20 degrees, so you want to have a jacket handy. Looking ahead, Jeju Island will see rain from early tomorrow morning through Wednesday morning, while the southern coast may see some rain from tomorrow afternoon into the evening. Rainfall will remain on the lighter side, with Jeju Island expected to see between 5 and 30 millimeters of rain, while the southern coastal areas will see less than 5 millimeters. As for temperatures tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 12 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 9 degrees, Daejeon at 11 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 25 degrees, Chuncheon at 25 degrees as well, Gwangju at 23 degrees. Temperatures will remain above seasonal averages for the time being, bringing mild conditions, but large day-to-night temperature swings will continue.
Those are the headlines at this hour here in South Korea. Thank you for watching. Do join us again same time tomorrow.
난 상관없어요 날 먹으면 여기 밟고 떠날래요 우리 가득 꽂잖아 큰 소리는 무서워 오늘로 끝나는 어떤 맘들
Five.
In
Action.
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 In Pakistan this past weekend between the U.S. and Iran have failed to bridge the gap over their differences. With more press perspective today. Hello and welcome. You're watching Press Perspective for this Monday, April 13th here in Seoul. I'm in Sanhee. Dialogue between diplomatic delegations from the U.S. and Iran in Pakistan this past weekend ended with no deal and instead renewed defiance from both sides. For more on this, I have Fabian Kretschmer with German press agency DPA here in the studio. Fabian, it's great to have you back.
Great to be back, yeah.
I also have Professor Che Hyun-jin at Kyunghee University. Live on the line, Professor Che, it's a pleasure to have you with us.
Thank you for having me.
Lovely. We shall start here in the studio. Fabian, let's begin with details that have been disclosed about the talks between the U.S. and Iran over in Pakistan this past weekend.
Yeah, Islamabad was hosting the first direct talks between U.S. and Iranian government officials. So they were talking directly, not mediated through a third party. And that was really a marathon session. The negotiations lasted over 20 hours. And sadly, I have to say there was no deal. There was no agreement reached after the talks have ended. And I'm quoting J.D. Vance, the vice president who represented the U.S. side. He said, "The bad news is that we have not reached an agreement, and I think that's bad news for Iran much more than it's bad news for the US." And he said that they have not chosen our terms, quote end. And you can see, or that's actually what was said by both sides, that the expectations were unrealistic, were quite demanding. So the US said that Iran didn't accept our terms, and vice versa, Iran didn't want to accept the US terms. I mean, from the US side, and we will talk about that probably much more later, the main issue was the nuclear issue. They wanted a very strong commitment that Iran will not be able to pursue nuclear weapons. But of course, from the Iranian point of view, they wanted to have the possibility to enrich uranium for civilian purposes. But I mean, that's kind of, to work out those details is quite complicated. And yeah, from the Iranian side, they wanted basically that the US would free a lot of frozen assets. That was a big issue, basically economic commitments, the sanctions, they wanted them lifted, etc. And then, of course, the Strait of Hormuz, the big oil shipment route. Iran, from their point of view, they want to rebuild the country by, charging oil tankers. Right now, it's $2 million per shipment, and use that money to rebuild the country. But of course, that is not acceptable for the US side. So you can really see that both sides clashed, and right now, we don't have any solution yet.
Right, we do not. But Professor Che, for the time being though, as Fabian mentioned, the talks lasted over 20 hours. How do you evaluate these efforts to ensure stability in the Middle East?
Yeah, unfortunately, I don't think this talk in Pakistan brought stability to the region. This talk was very important because they brought the US and Iran for the first time after a long fight. But unfortunately, the talk failed. And it shows the huge gap between the two warring parties. The United States asked for a very strong term, including the removing of all of Iran's highly enriched uranium and the transferring those uranium to the United States, and also fully reopening the Strait of Hormuz. For Donald Trump, these are not just technical issues. They are a sign of American victory, which is so important for his incoming midterm election as well. But for Iran, and these terms are the Strait of Hormuz and uranium, and they are the last bargaining tools. And giving them up would mean a complete surrender for the Iranian government. And for this reason, Iran chose not to accept American demands. So now we are seeing a move from diplomacy to coercion and pressure, including some naval blockade by America once again, and also possible military action. So this is not a stable situation, and I think this is very uncertain and the risk phase of the war.
Right, and speaking about pressure, Fabian, Mr. Trump took to his social media platform over the weekend to share his thoughts about the talks in Pakistan. What has he been saying?
Yeah, I think those actually two lengthy posts on Truth Social on his online platform were quite interesting because first they gave insights why the talks, according to Trump, fell through and what he did afterwards. But I will start with why the talks have been unsuccessful. He wrote, Trump, and I'm quoting here, "The meeting went well. Most points were agreed to, but the only point that really mattered, nuclear, was not." So according to Trump, that was the main issue why things fell through. And Trump announced in those posts a blockade of the Strait of Hormuz. And, you might wonder, okay, why, does Trump want to block the strait that has been already almost closed for a long time? I think he wants to open the strait. But according to Trump's logic, right now, Iran can decide which ships go through and, they can be charged. And from the US point of view, they say say either no ship can go through or all ships can go through, and then they don't need to be charged. And that's why right now he's trying to blockade the Strait of Hormuz, starting Korea evening time or late evening time on Monday. And that has consequences. Right now the oil prices have been surging, and today the trading week started by the East Asian stock markets opening relatively low. I mean, it was not like a collapse or whatsoever, but you can see some disappointment by the markets, and so let's see how that will go. Yeah.
Right. In the meantime, Professor Che, what do you suppose have been the gains and losses for the U.S. amid Mr. Trump's preemptive assault against Iran?
Yes, I think there are some gains of the United States as well. First, the United States has weakened Iran's military capability. It has destroyed some of Iran's key military and economic infrastructure, and also reduced Iran's ability to attack Israel in the short term. And secondly, the United States has shown its strong military power. So it can strengthen its deterrence and also send a clear message to both Iran and other countries like Cuba, North Korea, and possibly China. However, there are also very important costs as well. The first, although America is one of the largest oil producing country, even oil prices in America are rapidly rising, which can hurt the American, also global economy and American people. And secondly, there is a risk of larger conflict in the region. So there's a real danger of a further escalation of the war into a regional war, not just including Iran, America, but also other countries like Lebanon and Yemen. So in general, the United States has gained a short-term military advantage, but at the cost of much higher long-term risk.
And staying with that then, Professor Che, in your view, what about Iran? What has it gained and what has it lost?
Yes, like America, Iran has some gains and loss as well. On the one hand, Iran has managed to survive the initial attack by America and Israel, and it has maintained its core position. And it is not accepted American demands yet, especially on the nuclear issue and also the Strait of Hormuz, and also its ruling elite, especially the Revolutionary Guard. They are still in power. And also, there has been no clear evidence that there is a popular uprising inside Iran. So this allows Iranian elite to keep its bargaining position right now. On the other hand, the costs are serious. Iran has suffered a serious damage to its military and economic infrastructure, and it is also facing stronger economic pressure, especially on its oil exports. So simply speaking, they are harming oneself by closing the Strait of Hormuz, which is very important for its oil exports. So Iran has kept its position, but also at a very high cost.
Right. Fabian, speaking as a German correspondent, what can you tell us about Europe's response to the attempts to advance peace in the Middle East?
Well, I think Europe wants peace and stability. I mean, how the position has shifted. I mean, in the beginning, I could see some euphoria about the war, but mostly among the Iranian diaspora in Europe. I mean, I just spent the last weeks in Europe, and for example, in front of the Iranian embassy in Vienna, I could witness people with Iranian roots celebrating, cheering when actually their country was attacked, and that they were waving also U.S. and even Israel flags, and that goes to show how desperate many people in the diaspora must have been wanting a regime change. But now a regime change is off the table. What has changed? Actually, not that much. And you know, for Europe, the position is that we didn't want the war from the beginning. Actually, we suffer much more from the effects of the war than the US does. And now Trump is asking us to clean up the mess. I mean, because Trump wants Europe to get involved when it comes to like securing free shipping of the Strait of Hormuz, etc. And Europe, I think, rightfully says, look, we didn't start the war, and now you want to get us involved. And there's actually also another aspect, because it's a regional conflict, and one conflict also is the fight between Israel and Hezbollah, one of the proxies by Iran, and Germany and France. On the one hand, they of course support Israel. They want Israel to defend itself, and and those proxies, they have been attacking Israel for quite a long time. But they're also very concerned about the excessive use of force that has been going on recently. That the attacks that Israel is doing against Lebanon. I mean, there was really some horrible scenes that came out of those attacks, and so. To make it short, it is really getting messy, and Europe is very concerned that this conflict might get even might spread even further. So Europe wants peace, I think, but how to achieve that right now is quite difficult. Yeah.
Right, indeed. And speaking about Israel and Lebanon, the officials from the two sides, Professor Che, are slated to sit down at the U.S. State Department this week, I believe Tuesday, for talks. Ahead of this meeting, though, Professor Che, their top diplomats to the U.S. spoke on the phone. Could you touch upon the importance of these interactions for us?
Yes, there has been some report on this diplomatic meeting between Israel and Lebanon. So I think these kind of interactions are important, but unfortunately, we should not expect too much. So anyway, in this kind of crisis, even a small diplomatic contacts are precious because they can anyway help prevent further escalation. Okay. But however, we must remember there's a major structural problem. That is, the Lebanese government and Hezbollah are not the same. So in other words, even if Lebanon agrees in talk and they make some agreement with Israel, it does not mean Hezbollah will follow. So in fact, Hezbollah is more closely linked to Iran than to the Lebanese government. In reality, there has been some conflict and rivalry between the Lebanese government and Hezbollah, but Hezbollah has maintained a very close cooperation and cooperative relationship with the Iranian government. So the real key issue is not Lebanon, but Iran. So unless Iran changes its policy, it'll be very hard to change the behavior of Hezbollah. So that's why it is difficult to expect a major breakthrough from this talk between Israel and the Lebanese government. So this is more about managing the situation or managing the crisis, not solving the real problem.
Right. And against those mounting tensions then, Fabien, CNN, it had an exclusive report about China set to ship arms to Iran. Could you tell us a bit more about this exclusive coverage by CNN?
Yeah, that was really a bombshell scoop. So CNN reported that China is allegedly preparing to send air defense missiles to Iran, and China so far has rejected that claim. They say they denied those accusations, but of course we cannot verify them. But from my understanding, the U.S. intelligence, I mean, those reports, at least in recent years, have more often turned out to be true than not. And at least I would say, with my knowledge about China, I mean, China basically doesn't hold any formal alliances with countries. That is important to know. So they actually don't care ideologically much whether, the regime right now in Tehran is in power or not, as long as oil is shipping and as long both, align with their national interests. So for China, I think their own national interests come first, and everything else doesn't matter that much. But since, if it would be true that China is indeed preparing those air defense missiles, I think they would be of a lot of, use, because they could learn in real experience situation how they would perform in combat. I mean, basically also getting tested against the U.S. military. I mean, both countries are rivals, U.S. and China. They are the two hegemonial powers. They will decide who's basically the hegemon in the next 50, 60 years. And so I think it could be true. And what China is basically doing is not too different than what it does with the war in Ukraine. They are neutral in their own propaganda, I would say, but they send dual-use products to Russia. So they are siding with one side, but not too much. It's a fine line that they walk, but they are not neutral in my understanding. So I would not be totally surprised if this report turns out to be true, actually.
Right. Professor Che, speaking as a scholar, what do you suppose would be the broader implications of such a shipment of arms from Beijing to Tehran amid Tehran's conflict with Washington?
Oh yes, as Fabian just said, there's been some media report about the China is transferring some air defense system to Iran through third parties. If it is true, even if it is true, it is still too early to make a clear prediction about its geopolitical consequence. But however, one important point is that the war between great powers, such as U.S. and China, do not start as direct conflict between the two countries. Think about the example of a Peloponnesian War between the ancient Athens and Sparta. And this war began from a civil war in a small city-state called Epidemnus. And the World War I also started from a regional tension in the Balkan, especially some independence movement by the Serbian people. And also the war in the Korean Peninsula, between US and China started as a North Korean invasion of South Korea. So in that sense, this situation in Iran and also possible transfer of weapons from China to Iran does not necessarily mean a direct US-China conflict, but it does show some possibility. So in other words, the Iranian war between Israel, America, and Iran, and this war could become a pathway through which the competition between US and China may expand. And for this reason, I think we should watch this development and possible provision of real weapon from China to Iran very carefully.
Right, I'm sure quite a number of people will be keeping their eyes on that possibility. I'm afraid that's all the time we have today. Professor Che, as always, thank you very much for your time and your thoughts.
Thank you very much.
And Fabien here in the studio, thank you very much for your insights.
Thank you.
Right, on that note, we end Monday's edition of Press Perspective. Thank you for watching. Do join us again, same time tomorrow.
여러분 안녕하십니까? 대한민국의 목소리를 세계에 전하는 아리랑 TV의 30주년을 축하드립니다.